when you apply on a sunscreen and you have very little commentary. It's like
Oh,
not exciting at all. There is not a single aspect I can like even talk about. I just feel like there is something, there's some label we should give this. All right. Welcome back, everybody. This is the Chemist Confessions podcast, and I'm Victoria.
and I'm Gloria.
And today we are finally talking about sunscreens. It is going to be our 30 for 30 challenge summary.
Oh, man, what a saga. I will say this year is a little bit less painful than last year. I feel like,
Yeah.
given our experience last year, it kind of prepared me for what we were about to get ourselves into. But I think along the way, we still learned a lot of new things about our own preferences, what's on the market, and just general interesting takeaways.
Yeah. I think if I were to sum it all up in a general feel, one is it actually forced me to like go work out, which I don't know if anybody like postpartum, there's just like working out is like bottom of the priority list. So in that sense, I'm really grateful we did this challenge.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm like mildly surprised is I'm still surprised that I'm still like, I guess this is a funny line. I'm surprised that I'm surprised by some of these sunscreens. Like
I
I
think
didn't think
that's
you and
infinite.
I would feel like, yeah, I don't think you and I would have felt like there was going to be anything that was like super out of the ordinary, but we still found that somehow.
Yeah, so let's dive right into it. Before we get very candid about our feels on these sunscreens, I think we need to take some time to just review, some of the reasons behind our ratings and what are the limitations of the test that we're doing. And yeah, let's get right into it.
Yeah, so we should definitely talk about I guess how we decided to give our ratings. And even before this, I think Gloria and I were very hesitant to give ratings just in general because it was a party of two testing sunscreens. The sunscreen camera is more of a visual guide. There's nothing really measurable with the camera.
Right.
But ultimately, at the end of the day, people want to know what are the ones they should be getting, what to look for. And I think the only way to still capture that was giving it a number. So I think one of the major ones is definitely texture and just initial application, like how it rubbed in. I think that probably took like a huge chunk of the rating for me, in my opinion, Gloria.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's one of the things I learned about myself last year is, even though we're in this industry, we know in theory what it takes to apply the right amount and whatnot. But in our
Yeah.
personal lives, before we did this test series, I'll be honest, I'm still a little casual about it. So last year when we kicked it off and when we started playing, doing the 3 finger rule and then really applying enough sunscreen, that playtime and rub in importance just shoots way up the list for me. And sometimes I will knock 3 stars down if I find the application experience to be really lacking.
Yeah. And I think I think length of time it takes to absorb was a really big factor. Obviously, white cast, that's an instant decisive point. And I think the other thing is just generally like how it felt on skin. Like for me, being an oily skin person, things can get very heavy very quickly.
Yeah.
But even more so, actually, by the 2 hour mark, I felt like my oily skin was a good indicator of like how it held up over time and how it left my skin feeling. So yeah, I feel like those, again, like we always talk about, texture is king when choosing a sunscreen. You want to be able to feel like you can reapply, you can put a lot on. This should feel like second nature to just put this product on and not feel like you're
A
just
chore.
battling with this sunscreen.
Yeah.
Yeah, trying to please, like I need to do this, but it shouldn't be a painful point, basically.
Yeah, and I have dry skin, so I kind of bring that other perspective to it. I mean, guys, this part of it is subjective, so we do try to, in our captions and in our description, we do try to remind you guys, like, okay, I have dry skin, Victoria has oily skin, so
Yeah.
take what we say, with your own skin type in mind. For me,
Yeah.
what's like really awful is some formulas, namely a lot of the minerals, are both greasy and drying on dry skin, and it just in
Yeah.
my head has a special place in hell,
Yeah.
and a lot of formulas I can't even describe it. Some formulas will go on pretty fresh and pretty natural, but over time it just sucks the joy and life out of my already dry skin. I
Sucking the joy is strong.
yeah,
That's a
I
strong
had that
factor.
experience with actually this we didn't test it this year or the year before, but a couple years back, Victoria and I went back to Asia together during summer, and it
Yeah.
was so hot, so I bought the top selling like ultra sweat resistant, super duper fresh like sunscreen. I think it's the Senka one, and that one first of all has really high alcohol content, which to be honest doesn't bother me that much, but it's
Mhm.
alcoholy and very powdery. So even with like
Yeah.
95% humidity, 2 hours in, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other thing regarding texture that I should come clean about is there are definitely a lot of silicone formulas,
Yeah.
like basically silicone oil gel suspensions of sunscreen. And I am definitely biased in that I do not particularly love these textures. I
Hmm.
think I did note it when I did talk about a couple of them. There is something about them, and I don't know if it's because Gloria and I have worked too much with this material in
Hmm.
general. It's just when it applies on, there's just something just a little bit unnatural about the way it just glides forever. And
Yeah.
then it's just matte and it just leaves skin with so much slip. So that part I do have to say, it's like it was really hard to be objective and be like, okay, I don't like applying this, but how is it going to dry down? Like, try not to let that factor in. So I did want to
Yeah.
put that out there.
100%. And I just think that for those of you who are not sure what we're talking about, I think the best way to describe silicone textures is like your skin just looks and feels skin adjacent. There's just something a little
Yeah,
not right about
exactly.
it.
Yeah, it's anybody who's loved I think people always ask us to review Supergoop's is it Unseen Sunscreen?
Oh yeah,
And
that's
then
the
there's so many dupes of it
yeah.
now. And we ended up reviewing a Trader Joe's version of that. I think those are the main things. I should also mention, I think Gloria and I very rarely let the camera like influence the rating.
Oh,
That
actually that's
I
such a
think
good
there is
point. Hmm.
yeah, like I feel like even, we put it through sweat test. We saw maybe a little bit of, maybe where the film didn't like hold up that well. I don't think I let a lot of that really impact the rating too much. I just felt like it's just too it's not measurable enough, and there's too much room for human error. I tried really hard to not touch my face when when I sweat and work out as
Hmm.
much as I want to, but even then, it's just sometimes you just don't realize it. So that was something I did want to put out there.
Yeah, actually, that's a great segue for us to really dive into the limitations of the UV camera a little bit.
Yeah.
Like Victoria already mentioned, it's just a friendly reminder that the UV camera is just a very rough application guide. It doesn't
Yeah.
show you the degree of coverage, the amount of protection you're
Mhm.
actually getting, and the wavelength of that light is very, very limited. And it's mostly used as an application guide. And for us, we use it because it's still a good visual way to kind of showcase how you might miss a spot despite your best intentions. I actually find it to
Yeah.
be very useful with more unconventional formats like bombs. If I'm doing this
Mhm.
number and then I end up looking very checkered and there are spots that I very blatantly miss, that's a good visual. But other than that, it's hard to have firm takeaways from it. And I have to mention that this year we used the Pavise camera a lot, which is great for the quick and dirty thing, but I find the recording quality to be a little difficult. First of all, like the light that it uses always has a bit of a glare on my cheek. So in
Yeah.
that area, it's hard to see if, sunscreen's worn off or application is even or it's just a glare.
Yeah.
And at the same time, sometimes I'll write down my observations as I check myself in the Pavise camera. And I find that afterwards when we were editing the video, I find that the video quality doesn't quite translate what I saw very accurately. So it's all a little bit
Mm.
awkward.
Yeah. I mean, you got to hand it to Pavise for creating something that's like so
So
mobile
convenient.
and like
Yeah.
you should see our previous I'll even hold it up for you guys. Like our previous device that we use a sunscreener is totally not something I would be able to bring around. It's this big.
I think last year we brought it
And
to berries and we looked so stupid.
yeah, and it is so fragile at this point. It guys, it is the it is just breathing its last breath. It is so fragile. And I don't know how many times I told Gloria, I was like, I think it's dead. No, I think it's dead now. Like, so, but I also have to hit it to the sunscreener because that visual is actually way clearer and it's actually pretty good. So, in that sense, that's kind of why Gloria and I ended up kind of like doing a hybrid of both devices, especially for some of these like sunscreens like Nivea, which were just kind of perplexing all around. And to Gloria's point, the thing I did want to say about application, Gloria mentioned how like it doesn't show you how much you're applying on.
Yeah.
A really good example of that is when I tested the Beauty of Joseon stick. Holy cow, like even one coat looks like I'm good, but it's only like I think a third of what I was hoping to apply.
Right.
So that is a really good example of how like the camera doesn't actually tell you you're applying enough. It's only just showing coverage at that point. So yeah, those are the limitations of the camera.
But I will say what I ended up kind of relying on the camera on, and I do kind of judge a little bit based on what we see in the camera, is the evenness of a sunscreen film. To us, that is objectively one of the most important qualities in a sunscreen film, is that even film to get you great coverage and the proper protection. And if the film is really difficult to set up, or we see it sloshing around on the face, and even though the sunscreener and the PV's camera aren't the most accurate ways to depict level of coverage, to us, that's objectively a red flag.
Yeah, so Gloria's great segue into, let's talk about the sunscreens that we gave a big fat 0 to. And on that note, we should talk about Nivea's the UV Super Water Gel.
That made me so sad.
Yeah, I have to say, we got asked to test this I don't know how many times last year. And one thing I did want to say in comparison to 2023 and 2024 is everyone was way nicer 2024 and like asking like, hey, like I really like this sunscreen. Like, do you think you could try this? Last year, people would be like, test this one. Like, you should test this one. It was like straight up demands.
I think I've gotten a few. Last year we got a few like, why aren't you testing it? We're like, oh, my bad.
Yeah. So, but Gloria and I were really shocked by this one because the texture is wonderful. Yes, it's great for oily skin. It's one of those like, gel cream textures with a really fresh break. So it makes a lot of sense why it's loved. And I'll be honest, this is the type of texture that I gravitate towards. But in the camera, like when we were applying it, I was so stumped by how I just kept rubbing forever and ever and ever, and it was still in like streak form. And I think there's something about that. It's tough because Nivea definitely did the SPF studies. They definitely put it through testing. So, to say that it doesn't give any coverage, no, that's not what we're saying. But at the same time, because it took so long to create a film, I just feel like that's probably not the natural way that people are applying it. No one's going to sit there and keep rubbing and rubbing and rubbing and rubbing until skin is completely dry and then go, And so because of that, that's why Gloria and I feel like it's just not a sunscreen we could recommend for anyone. It's not a natural sunscreen. Yeah. It's just not something that we would feel comfortable saying that this is a one you should definitely use despite its great texture. Yeah.
Which leads to my big fat 0 that I gifted to Black Girl Sunscreen. That one was rough. Okay, so first of all, that one is a hybrid formula. It's primarily zinc with a little bit of octinoxate. What I did when I tested this sunscreen, that it was claimed to be water resistant, and for this year, if it's water resistant, I try to take it out on a run for a little torture test. So I had my UV camera set up, and I started recording my application, and it was taking a really, really long time. Typically, I would say the average sunscreen, it takes me about a minute-ish to rub in. Obviously, when we record it, we speed it up for you guys in real form, but it takes about a minute. This one, I was at it for 2 whole minutes. I have no idea what I looked like, but all I knew was like it was still very damp on my face. So I was like, you know
Mhm.
what? I need to check myself in a real camera. And that's when I saw that it's still a white, gooey mess, like sloshing around on my face. So I was like,
Mm.
okay, maybe it's just it just takes a really long time. Went at it for another 3 minutes and finally looked like it was starting to settle in a little bit. And that's when
Mm.
everything started peeling away on my face. And to me,
Mm.
pilling mild pilling, I might not even have given a 0, but it was, like, literally falling apart on my face, and to
Yeah.
me, that's I couldn't even trust that coverage enough to take it on a run because, I love this series, I love this test, but I'm not gonna go bake myself in the sun to prove a point.
Yeah.
So, like, to me, and the thing is I'm not a piller, right? Pilling can be skin type dependent, that's
Yeah.
why even if some formulas give 1 or 2 slight pills, I would give it a low rating, but I wouldn't give it a 0 because it's just incompatible with my skin or my skincare routine.
Yeah.
But this one, I don't see how it will hold up on anyone's skin. So sadly, that one got a fat 0 from me because and to compound that, the long rub-in timings, if you use a sunscreen and to try to make it work, it's very likely that you're only dabbling on just a little bit, so
Yeah.
it sets fast enough, and it might not pill on you. And to me, that's like the opposite of what you want a sunscreen to do.
So I did want to say, like, this is also in a way my bad because I
Mhm.
actually applied it on my hand, and I was like,
Uh-huh.
okay, like I was like this one I knew like with a little bit of rub-in, I was like, okay, it looks like it doesn't want to give that kind of like white cast or just white paste. I was like, okay, this one might actually work, and then lo and
Mhm.
behold, it's strictly because it's just there wasn't enough applied to really like I guess make that pilling scenario and that rub-in like happen. And I think like we kind of mentioned before, that is the nature of sunscreen use. It's just none of us are really applying enough. And
Mhm.
unfortunately that might be happening with this formula. So yeah, that is also a really sad one because I really thought I was like, okay, maybe that one might work. It's a hybrid. It's got a shot. I don't know.
Yeah, so those are our 2, at least in my mind, I
Yeah.
think objectively probably not worth you trying sunscreens. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of other ones we tested out, and we have some interesting
Yeah.
takeaways, some of our favorites, and we're gonna get right into it right after this break. All right, in case you guys missed it, our blank slate is back in stock, baby. This is our gentle gel cleanser that's now been tested by our incubator of skincare enthusiasts 3 different times and won out each time. We've had a lot of trouble keeping this one in stock the past few years, but this time, blank slate is back for good and with a complete glow up.
The bottle has a brand new look, and we are proud to say that it is made from 100% PCR, and that's post consumer recycled plastic, and the bottle is completely recyclable. So, whether you're an old fan or maybe you're just curious to see why this formula keeps going out of stock, please head to our website to snag your new cleanser love today. And also, don't forget code CCPodcast 2024 for 15% off your order. Okay.
All right.
All
Let's
right.
to dive into some of our favorites. Now that we've covered our least favorite, maybe we should talk about some positives. All right.
Yep.
First off, we have minerals, which is I think all the
Ooh,
buzz.
ooh, 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 ooh.
For a lot of reasons that we're not gonna dive into this episode. Check out some of our previous sunscreen work to learn about all the drama behind chemical sunscreen. But basically, last year, I feel like last year or the year before, everyone launched a new mineral formula,
Mhm.
and then they all
Mhm.
died because people realized they kind of suck. So this year, I think the true train carried on, but we see a lot less launches in just pure mineral. There's a lot more
Mm,
that's more hybrid.
mm,
I will be honest, when we were planning, Victoria planned a lot of the tests that we did this year. And she was like, hey, I'm going to give you mineral, okay? Because you have a hard time with your dry skin, you have a hard time with these formulas. So I think it'll be very insightful. I was like, oh, God damn
Yeah, you're
it.
like, "Joy, I'm so happy, thank you."
Yeah. And there were a couple that made me a little sad. I think for me, the problem is mineral filters by default is they're powder based. And so they're pretty powdery to begin with. You need a lot of oil in the formula to kind of keep them all suspended correctly, keep them spreading evenly on your skin. So to counteract the greasiness from the oil, a lot of times brands will put in more powders into the formula to make it soft and nice to the touch, which means it's really dry on my skin, and that tends to be my biggest problem with mineral sunscreens. The white cast aspect of it, obviously, I'm more on the fair side, so I'm not the best person to evaluate that. But in my book, if it's too white for me, then it's probably too white, period. So
Yeah.
I have to give the best in class award to Blue Lizard.
Oh, snap. And it's affordable.
Yeah, I have to say, if you look at my video, I think I gave this one a 6. You're gonna be like, Gloria, you gave this one a 6. Like, why is this the best mineral? But I will say, first of all, it does still give a white cast. It's not super offensive on me, but I also think that if that's something you care about, it's not going to be compatible with most skin tones. The rub-in time is long. It took me about 2 minutes for it to set, but at the same time, applying lots of this, it will still set and it sits very well and it holds up to the
Mm.
water resistant claim pretty well. I took it out on a really long run and it held up. But the most important thing to me is that it is budget friendly. So you wouldn't be shy about slathering it over your face, your neck, behind your ears, wherever. And that is a pretty important characteristic to us.
Yeah, I do want to say, as much as I threw a lot of minerals to Gloria, I had obviously a few minerals. They're all, for the most part, tinted,
Mhm.
except for Isden. Those will be in a different segment of this episode. But I just want to say some of these price tags are absolutely insane. Tatcha's at $64. Also, did you know Murad's City Defense is also like $68 now? I think before when I talked about it, it was like 59. And so I just think, yeah, definitely that price tag, especially for the affordable ones, I think is something that we kind of like gave them an extra point because it's just wild how expensive sunscreens are now. I cannot believe it.
That's something we noticed too when we were looking at drugstore sunscreens. We tried to test
Yeah.
a range of price points to find something for everyone. And even drugstore sunscreens are now like $25 for a face
Yeah.
sunscreen, which is
Yeah.
kind of getting up there.
Yeah, exactly. I did want to ask, so at the end of the day, you felt that wearing it, skin was like comfortable. It was like the texture, it didn't dry out skin. Is that also why you give that kind of like the best in class rating?
Yes. So on me, it did feel, I wouldn't say it's full on greasy, but it's
Mm,
definitely more nourishing. And that kind of
mm,
persisted throughout the time that I was wearing it. Um,
mm,
and at the end, it was never drying. Some people with oily skin might be a little bit bothered by that because it definitely stayed a little bit heavy. But on me, that was
mm,
reasonably comfortable. I wasn't offended by it. And sometimes they're heavier sunscreen, if I sweat and when that sweat starts mixing with the powder and the formula, it feels
yeah,
really gross. And this one
yeah,
didn't really feel like that to me. I think that was a huge plus. So yeah.
for sure, for sure. Okay, okay, all right. So Blue Lizard,
hmm
which is great. It's
hmm
accessible for everyone.
hmm
What else you got, Gloria?
I have to give a shout out to this Innisfree one. This
Mm-hmm.
one was a pleasant surprise to me. I tested the Haru one first, and these two are our K Beauty mineral entries.
Mm,
The Haru one to me is classic. It goes on very, very creamy. It feels
mm,
nourishing for about the first 20 minutes. It's a little white casty, which is, it didn't look too bad on me, but again, if you're even a shade darker than me, it might look a little off. Um,
mm,
and then after that, it started drying out my skin like crazy. I took this one to Costco. It was
mm.
just like a quick errand run. I was there testing my samples and just like, I can just feel it like pull on my face. It just felt so dry at the
Mhm,
end. And
mhm,
sadly, that's a very common experience I have with mineral face sunscreens. So I'm like,
mhm.
bleh. And after that, I put off testing this one for days. That the plan was to test that one and immediately go into this one for comparison. But I was like,
Yeah.
I don't want to. It feels terrible, man. But this one felt a lot better on my skin. It's not it's not moisturizing. It's very mildly drying on me, but
Mhm,
not really offensively so. Like I will just feel slightly dry at the end of it. And I will say some of the mineral ones that don't do well for my skin, I cannot wait to wash it off at the end of my test. But this one I will be willing to reapply. It also
mhm,
doesn't have a white cast for me. Obviously, if you're darker for me, you might have a different experience. But at the same time, it just when a product has a white cast, sometimes it's not necessarily that it makes me whiter than my base skin tone because I'm on the fair side. Sometimes it just has a hint of a naturalness to it. Whereas
mhm,
this Innisfree one honestly didn't have that issue with me. So I thought
mhm,
I was pretty pleasantly surprised by it. I was not expecting to even remotely like any of the pure minerals, to be honest.
I do think it's interesting that like Asian countries do formulate minerals. I feel like there were like very few, like not even a year ago.
Yeah.
But I feel like, we'll probably start seeing more and more
Hmm.
um, in the years to come. I do have a comment in this category. So, Isden, a lot of people asked us about this sunscreen,
Hmm.
and I think it's a very small comment. My
Hmm.
comment here is when you have, I don't know what it is, but it's like when you apply on a sunscreen and you have very little commentary. It's like
Oh.
not exciting at all. There is not a single aspect I can like even talk about. I just feel like there is something, there's some label we should give this.
That's the purito for me. I was like, I'm trying so hard to find something to say. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, I feel like I know a lot of people asked us about this, and yeah, but I put it on. It's fine. It's a mineral fluid. That's it. That's all I got. I don't got anything else. The texture is a textbook mineral fluid. Like, I don't know what to say. So I just want to put that out there. Sometimes we try on sunscreens and I'm just like stumped as to even like, all right, I don't know what you want. It's a mineral fluid.
You guys, we tested 30 this year, 30 last year. There are just formulas out there that you're like, I mean, it's a sunscreen. Exactly as Victoria said, you're like, it's a sunscreen. I actually had one that
Yeah.
I asked for my list. I bought one, I think it's one of the Neutrogena Hydro Boost ones. That one's like
Yeah.
boring, but it's very popular. It's like a staple drugstore sunscreen. So I was like, okay, I
Yeah.
should add that to the list. Oh my god, I have nothing to say. It's like the most classic, boring, basic
Yeah.
sunscreen ever. And you're just like, it's a sunscreen. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
know. I know. So, yeah, I just want to put that out there. Mineral fluids are, I feel like this is super comparable to the La Roche-Posay mineral fluid,
Hmm.
the Anthelios. The Anthelios is cheaper,
Hmm.
but there is something about mineral fluids for me where I just feel like it runs into my eyes. Like I just feel like I have this, it's more prone to irritating my eyes for some reason. But
I swear,
other
I
than that, yeah.
I think it's just the sheer amount of like lightweight oils that they have to put in it. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of
Yeah.
formulas also reach for the volatile organic. So it's like a bunch
Yeah.
of really lightweight oils that even if it's transfer proof, it still
Yeah.
bleeds just enough to be very irritating.
Yeah, so I think that's the one thing about the really thin mineral fluids for me that's like I'm a little bit hesitant to get it like too close to the eye area.
Mhm.
But otherwise, well, at least there are options. I think last year we tried minerals and we didn't have a lot to say.
Yeah,
We
we're
didn't
all just
have
like, boo.
All right. Yeah, so that's minerals. Since we're in this arena, let's talk about tinted because there's definitely a few.
Yeah.
I tried a lot.
I
I
punted a
tried the
lot of
coat.
it to Victoria.
Yeah, so Gloria gets the minerals, I get the tinted. Mainly because Gloria doesn't wear a lot of foundation. So and I do a little more, so there's that. So I tried Kosas, Say, Supergoot, Tower 28, Tatcha, Kate Somerville.
Wow.
Those are probably the six of them.
Hmm.
And just like last year, tinteds are on a spectrum of from sheer to high coverage.
Hmm.
And I would say high coverage is your Kosas, the Say, and the Supergoop. And these are all, I should say, differing SPF. So, and Tower 28. I'm sorry, not Say. So it's Kosas, Supergoop, Tower 28. Those are the three that are high coverage. And Tower 28, surprisingly, has the lowest SPF at SPF 30. Kosas is SPF 40, and Supergoops, that is their untinted, is SPF 50. But surprisingly, Tower 28 for me was like a lot heavier. And by the end of the day, I felt like it just wanted to start like sliding around and it was a bit too nourishing for me. I think I just want to put it out there that sometimes we think that SPF, like a lower SPF, will lead to a lighter texture, but that is not always the case. Well, it wasn't the case in this scenario that I want to point out. So, of the higher coverage ones, I actually really liked Kosas. I think it was a lighter. It went on lighter. The coverage wasn't too cakey, and I just think it's generally comfortable despite the amount putting on. So, but I think those three, they're all pretty close. Like, I think it'd be fine with any of those three. Say was surprising because I think the texture could be good, but had that the rancid smell, and I think that was
Oh,
like
a
pretty
production issue,
disappointing.
maybe.
Yeah. So I think, and what's interesting is when we shared this finding with everyone, it was kind of like a mixed bag where some people said they smelled it and others said they didn't. So it could be in like differing shades, differing lots. So I would say just like look out for that. And then of the sheer tinteds, I really like Supergoop's Glow Screen. I think it's a really nice like dewy. If you want that kind of like glow dewy vibe, I think that texture is really pretty. Tatcha's, I mentioned this before, very expensive formula, comparable to Murad City Defense. And it's funny because when I tested this, I was like, this is Murad City Defense. I think Murad is cheaper, so I would just like tell them to do that one. No. Tatcha is cheaper by a few dollars. So in that sense, I'm like, they're comparable. So if you like either one. But I think I actually wanted to give a shout out to Kate Somerville's. Theirs is, I think the price point is, I wrote it down here, is $46. It's definitely in the same realm as Tatcha and Murad. And I think the texture is pretty comfortable. It does have, I mean, with any mineral, it's always going to have like a film and it's going to be slightly more nourishing. But it didn't bother me. Yeah, so those were my findings of the 6 that I tried.
I was really scared of this category. So for the most part, I was like, go, Victoria, go. But I did end up testing 2 of the more sheer ones myself. That is the very popular Ulta MD one and the dermatology one. And I'm surprised by the dermatology one in a good way. I actually end up liking it quite a bit. And it is sheer, so it doesn't offer a lot of coverage, but at the same time, on my skin, it's just enough. It's kind of like it's your skin, but a little better kind of
Yeah.
vibes. And
Yeah.
you can layer it on thick, and it still feels pretty good. So to me, that's obviously the most important thing for these coverage. Anything with coverage, all the tinted, I think is it can get a little awkward in terms of, do you want to apply like a tinted foundation versus a sunscreen? And if you're
Yeah.
using it as your primary sunscreen, then you should be caking on pretty thick. And the dermatology formula is pretty good for that. The Ulta MD, the initial application is pretty similar, but I will say that one to me feels more like the classic problem with tinted is that you only want to apply a pretty thin layer. So I had like 2 gunky fingers. I didn't even go to the third finger, and the rubbing time took a little long. So it took me quite a bit to just set the first finger worth of formula. And when I applied the second one, the texture started feeling a little unnatural, and towards the end, it kind of wants to pill. I gave that one a 3 out of 10. Again, I didn't give it a 0 because it's mild pilling, just a little bit, but it's not very layer friendly. So to me, that one is one I like, even though it's super popular, it didn't work for me, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
You know what's funny is this is the only category that when we do this like 2-3 finger method, I am like borderline scared. Like
Oh, yeah.
I'll like apply it and then I'm like at the second finger, I'm like, maybe just 2 fingers. That looks worthy enough. That's enough. That's enough. Like
So
I feel like it's a risk. Like I'm about to walk out with like a mud mask, basically.
basically, well, I have small hands and short little fingers, and in this category, I literally bargain with myself like, "Oh yeah, 2 knuckles. That's practically 1 whole finger, right?"
Yeah. So yeah, and I think we should also say that I think Laura and I, we gravitate towards sheer. One, because we're lazy, so the thought of having to carry around like makeup wipes to reapply is not something we think about. And then the second being we kind of are just used to like a more I guess like like bare skin look. So that's the kind of textures we gravitate towards. But I will say this category is really improving.
Yeah, it's
So
true.
there is definitely options to like using, a tinted sunscreen as a foundation. I think it's only going to get better. And some of these are actually pretty solid. So yeah. All right, guys. We just wrapped this episode and realized it is way too long.
Yep, so we have decided to trim this into part 1 and part 2 so you guys can enjoy taking all the content without suffering sunscreen fatigue like we are clearly going through. And we'll see you guys next week for the rest of the roundup.